The sun hung mercilessly in the cloudless New Mexico sky, a blazing eye that turned the earth to dust and men's throats to sandpaper. It was exactly noon on a Tuesday in August, 1889, when Jacob McAllister hammered the notice onto the weathered post outside Murphy's General Store. Ranch cook needed room, board, fair wages. Inquire at Double V Ranch, 10 miles north. The words were simple enough, written in Jacob's careful hand on brown paper that was already curling at the edges from the heat. He'd posted it at Coulter Vane's request, though he doubted anyone would answer. The Double V wasn't known for its hospitality, and Coulter himself had grown as thorny as the mesquite since Martha died 2 winters past. 10 miles north, Coulter Vane stood on his porch, squinting at the horizon where the land shimmered like water that would never come. 35 years had carved deep lines around his gray eyes, and the last 2 had added silver to his dark hair. The house behind him sat silent as a tomb, its kitchen cold despite the scorching day. He'd fired the last cook 3 days ago for burning the coffee and talking too much. Before that, old Miguel had lasted a month before his arthritis sent him back to his daughter in Santa Fe. The ranch hands were threatening mutiny if they had to eat another meal of Coulter's beans and hardtack. "You planning to stand there all day, or are we going to check that fence line?" His foreman, Tom Briggs, emerged from the barn leading 2 saddled horses. Tom was the only man on the ranch who dared speak to Coulter like an equal, having known him since they were boys raising dust in Amarillo. "Notice should be posted by now," Coulter said, not moving from his spot. "Optimistic of you, thinking anybody'd want to work for a bear with a sore head." Coulter's jaw tightened, but he didn't dispute it. He knew what he'd become. The house, the ranch, even the sky itself seemed to press down on him with Martha's absence. He'd built this place for her, and now it stood as a monument to emptiness. "Let's ride," he said finally, taking his horse's reins. They were still within sight of the ranch when they spotted the unlikely procession moving along the dusty road. A woman walked beside a mule-drawn cart, 3 children perched among what looked like all their worldly possessions. Even from a distance, Coulter could see the determined set of her shoulders, the way she kept her chin up despite the pitiless sun. "That's a sight," Tom muttered. "Woman traveling alone with young ones. Dangerous country for that." As they drew closer, Coulter could make out more details. The woman wore a faded blue dress that had seen better days, but it was clean and mended with careful stitches. A worn sunbonnet shadowed her face. The children, 2 boys and a girl, watched the approaching riders with solemn eyes. The older boy, maybe 12, had his hand protectively on a younger boy's shoulder. The girl, perhaps 8, clutched a cloth doll. The woman stopped as they approached, one hand moving to rest on the cart's side. Not reaching for a weapon, Coulter noted, but ready to if needed. Smart. "Ma'am?" Tom touched his hat brim. "Everything all right, long way from anywhere out here?" She pushed back her bonnet, revealing a face that the sun had touched but not defeated. Green eyes met Coulter's directly, and something in that steady gaze made his breath catch. She wasn't beautiful in the conventional sense. Her nose had a determined tilt. Her mouth was a touch too wide, but there was something compelling in the intelligence that sparked in her expression. "We're quite well, thank you." Her voice carried a hint of Virginia refinement worn down by hardship. "We're looking for the Double V Ranch. I understand it's this direction." Coulter found himself speaking before Tom could. "I'm Coulter Vane. I own the Double V. What's your business there?" She straightened, squaring her shoulders. "Margaret Hartley, Maggie, I've come about the position." "Position?" Coulter frowned. "What position? For a cook? You posted for a ranch cook." The words hung in the hot air. Tom's eyebrows climbed toward his hatband. Coulter stared at the woman, Maggie Hartley, trying to reconcile what he was seeing with what she was saying. "That notice was posted an hour ago," he said slowly. "In town, 10 miles south." "Yes," she agreed. I was at Murphy's when Mr. McAllister put it up. We started immediately. You walked 10 miles in this heat with 3 children to apply for a ranch cook position. Her chin lifted a fraction higher. I did. Is there a problem with that? There were a dozen problems with it, starting with the impropriety of a widow, for she surely was one, wearing black ribbon on her sleeve, living on a ranch with a bunch of rough men, but looking at her standing there in the dust, children silent and watchful behind her. Coulter found himself curious despite his better judgment. Can you cook? I can. Ranch cooking's not like cooking for a family. It's cooking for a dozen hungry men, 3 meals a day, every day. I managed a boarding house kitchen in Denver for 2 years, 25 boarders, 3 meals a day. She paused. Until it burned down. The older boy, a lanky kid with his mother's green eyes, spoke up. Mama's the best cook in Colorado, or New Mexico, or anywhere. Hush, James, Maggie said quietly, but Coulter caught the ghost of a smile. What happened to your husband? The question was blunt, but necessary. The smile vanished. Wagon accident, 6 months ago. Tom shifted uncomfortably in his saddle. Coulter knew he should send her on her way. A widow with 3 children was trouble he didn't need, but something about the way she stood there, asking for nothing but a chance to work, stirred an echo of admiration. The position includes room and board. He heard himself saying, there's a cabin behind the main house. Hasn't been used in a while, but it's sound. You'd take your meals with the hands. Children, too. Hope flickered in her eyes before she tamped it down. The wages. $30 a month plus the cabin and meals. It was fair, maybe even generous. She nodded once, decisively. When would you need me to start? You're hired. Tom's surprise burst out before he could stop it. Coulter ignored him. Tomorrow morning would be fine. Can you make it the rest of the way? We've come this far, Maggie said simply. Tom will ride ahead. Get some of the boys to clean out the cabin. He wheeled his horse around, then paused. Breakfast is at 5. Lunch at noon. Dinner at 6. Ranch runs on schedule. We'll be ready. As they rode away, Tom waited until they were out of earshot before exploding. Have you lost your mind? A woman with children, Coulter. The men will eat decent food for a change. Coulter cut him off. And if they have anything to say about Mrs. Hartley or her children, they can say it to me. Tom subsided, but Coulter could feel his stare. She reminds you of her, doesn't she, Martha? She's nothing like Martha. The words came out harsher than intended. Martha had been delicate as a spring flower, with soft hands and a laugh like silver bells. This Maggie Hartley was all determination and worn cotton, steady gazes and children clinging to her skirts. But as they crested the rise and the double V spread out before them, Coulter found himself glancing back. The small group was still moving steadily along the road, the woman's blue dress a spot of color against the brown landscape. At the ranch, word spread quickly. By the time Coulter reached the barn, half his crew had found reasons to be working nearby. A woman cook, Pete Garrison, youngest of the hands, couldn't hide his excitement. A real woman, with children. Tom added meaningfully. Children, old Sam, who'd been with the ranch since Coulter's father's time, frowned deeply. This ain't no place for children. Remember what happened last month with those raiders hitting the Hendricks place? The Hendricks didn't have 12 armed men on hand. Coulter said, get that cabin cleaned out. I want it fit for a family by nightfall. The men scattered, but Coulter could hear the murmur of speculation following in his wake. He retreated to his study, trying to focus on the ledgers, but his mind kept drifting to a pair of steady green eyes and the way she'd said, we've come this far. As the sun began its descent, painting the desert in shades of gold and crimson, the small procession finally rolled through the double V gates. Coulter watched from his window as Maggie Hartley climbed down from the cart, stretched her back, and then turned to help her children down. The boys immediately began exploring with their eyes, taking in the barn, the corrals, the main house. The girl stayed close to her mother's skirts. Several of the hands had found excuses to be in the yard. Coulter saw the way they stopped and stared, saw the way Maggie ignored them with practiced ease, focusing on her children and their belongings. He should go down, show them to the cabin himself. It was the proper thing to do, but something held him in place, watching as Tom approached and gestured toward the small house. Maggie nodded, gathered her children, and followed. The cabin had been Martha's project, built for a foreman's family that had never materialized. It stood in the shade of 2 cottonwoods, with a view of the mountains to the west. Through the window, Coulter could see the men had done their work. Lamplight glowed warmly through clean windows. As darkness settled over the ranch, Coulter found himself standing on his porch again, looking toward the cabin where new light shone. The sound of children's voices carried on the evening air, followed by a woman's gentle admonishment. For the first time in 2 years, the Double V didn't feel quite so empty. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges. The men would test her. The work would be hard, and the propriety of the situation would set tongues wagging from here to Santa Fe. But tonight, there was light in the cabin and the promise of a real breakfast come morning. Coulter allowed himself one more moment of watching before retreating inside. He had no business thinking about green eyes and determined chins. He'd hired a cook, nothing more. The fact that she'd walked 10 miles in the desert sun to answer his notice meant only that she needed the work. But as he lay in his empty bed, listening to the familiar sounds of the ranch settling for the night mixed with the new sound of life from the cabin, Coulter found himself wondering what kind of woman walked into the unknown with such steady courage, and why, for the first time in 2 years, he was looking forward to morning. The rooster hadn't even crowed when Maggie Hartley lit the lamp in the ranch house kitchen. 4:30 in the morning, and the desert air still held yesterday's heat like a grudge. She'd already been up an hour, stoking the massive iron stove that dominated one wall, a beast that would have intimidated a lesser woman. But Maggie had faced down worse than an ornery stove. She surveyed her new domain with a general's eye, the long wooden table scarred by years of use, the shelves lined with mismatched dishes, the pantry stocked with basics, but little else. Everything was clean enough, but had the neglected feel of a place that hadn't known a woman's touch in too long. Through the window, she could see lamplight beginning to flicker in the bunkhouse. In half an hour, 12 hungry men would expect breakfast. Her first test. "Can I help, Mama?" She turned to find James dressed and ready, his young face serious in the lamplight. At 12, he was trying so hard to be the man of their small family. "You can start on the coffee," she said, knowing the task would make him feel useful. 3 scoops per pot, and we'll need 4 pots. As James worked, she lost herself in the familiar rhythm of cooking. Biscuit dough came together under her practiced hands, light and fluffy despite the altitude. Bacon sizzled in cast-iron pans, filling the air with its smoky perfume. Eggs waited in baskets, ready to be scrambled in the bacon grease. Potatoes, diced fine, went into another skillet with onions she'd found hanging in the pantry. "Smells like heaven in here." The voice made her jump. Tom Briggs stood in the doorway, hat in hand, looking somewhat embarrassed at startling her. "Mr. Briggs, you're early." "Wanted to make sure you found everything all right." He paused, inhaling deeply. "Ma'am, if that tastes half as good as it smells, you might have a mutiny on your hands when the boys find out it's not permanent." "It's a 3-day trial, I understand," Maggie said carefully, not pausing in her work. "That's what the boss says." Tom moved closer to the stove, drawn by the warmth and aromas. "But between you and me, if you can cook like this every day, he'd be a fool to let you go." The kitchen door banged open again, and men began filing in, their conversation dying as they spotted Maggie at the stove. She'd expected this. The stares, the sudden silence. the awkward shuffle as they tried to figure out how to act with a woman in their space. "Gentlemen," she said calmly, not turning from the stove. "Breakfast will be on the table in 5 minutes. I trust you know where you usually sit." That broke the spell. The men moved to their places, though she could feel their eyes following her as she worked. She'd dressed carefully, her most modest dress, hair severely pinned, wedding ring prominent on her finger despite its painful reminder. Let them look. She had work to do. With James's help, she began setting food on the table. Platters of biscuits, bacon, eggs, and fried potatoes. Pots of coffee strong enough to float a horseshoe. A jar of preserves she'd been saving for a special occasion. The silence as the men began eating was more eloquent than any compliment. Forks scraped plates, coffee was poured and repoured. And gradually conversation resumed. Talk of the day's work, which horses needed attention, where the cattle had been spotted. This is real good, ma'am," ventured Pete Garrison, the young hand she'd noticed yesterday. "Best breakfast we've had in, well, since Martha passed." Old Sam finished bluntly. "No offense meant, ma'am, just speaking truth." "None taken," Maggie said, refilling the coffee pot. "I understand you've had a difficult time keeping a cook." "Miguel wasn't bad," another hand offered. "But his biscuits could have been used for fence posts." A ripple of laughter ran through the room, quickly stifled as the door opened again. Coulter Vane entered, bringing with him an immediate change in atmosphere. The men straightened, focused on their plates with renewed interest. He took his seat at the head of the table, surveyed the spread before him, then began eating without comment. Maggie refused to let it bother her. She'd cooked for taciturn men before. She was heading back to the stove when his voice stopped her. "Mrs. Hartley." "Yes, Mr. Vane." "The biscuits, what did you do to them?" Her heart sank. "Is something wrong with them?" "They're light." He looked at her directly for the first time that morning. "Haven't had a light biscuit in 2 years." Before she could respond, he'd turned his attention back to his plate, but she caught the look Tom Briggs shot her, a grin and a subtle thumbs up. The rest of the meal passed smoothly. As the men filed out to begin their day's work, several nodded to her or murmured their thanks. Small victories, but she'd take them. "Mama, can we explore today?" She turned to find Grace, her 8-year-old, peeking around the kitchen door, behind her. 6-year-old Henry bounced on his toes with barely contained energy. "After we clean up here and you've done your lessons," Maggie said. "And you stay away from the corrals and the men working." "Understood." "Yes, Mama," they chorused. The morning flew by in a blur of cleaning, preparing lunch, and settling her children into their new routine. James helped her in the kitchen while Grace and Henry did their sums at the big table. It wasn't ideal, but it was workable. Lunch was a simpler affair. Cold sandwiches, pickles, and apple pie she'd made from dried fruit. The men ate quickly, eager to get back to work, but she noticed more than one slice of pie disappear into pockets for later. It was while preparing dinner that her first real challenge arose. She was elbow deep in bread dough when Grace came running, Henry at her heels. "Mama, there's a lady outside who says we shouldn't be here." Maggie's hands stilled. She'd known this was coming, had braced for it, but hoped for a few more days of peace first. "Stay inside," she told the children, wiping her hands on her apron as she headed for the door. A buggy sat in the yard. Its occupant, a woman in her 50s, wearing a dress that cost more than Maggie had seen in years. Everything about her, from her perfectly arranged gray hair to her spotless gloves, spoke of town respectability. "You must be the new cook," the woman said, her tone making it clear what she thought of that. "I'm Mrs. Edward Thornton. My husband owns the bank in town." "Pleased to meet you," Maggie said, not moving from the doorway. "I'm sure." Mrs. Thornton's eyes swept over her. taking in the flour-dusted apron, the simple dress, the wedding ring. "I've come to speak plainly. Mrs. Hartley."
Mrs. Hartley, perhaps you don't understand how things work here. Mr. Vane is a respected member of our community. Despite his recent difficulties, it's highly improper for an unmarried woman to be living on his property.
"I'm a widow, Mrs. Thornton, as I'm sure you already know. And I'm employed here, nothing more. Nevertheless, people will talk."
"People always do," Maggie said evenly.
"Now, if you'll excuse me, I have dinner to prepare for 12 hungry men who work for their living." Color rose in Mrs. Thornton's cheeks. "You can't simply dismiss the standards of decent society." "I can when decent society offers nothing but judgment instead of help." The words came out sharper than intended. "Good day, Mrs. Thornton." She turned and went back inside, her hands trembling slightly as she returned to her bread. Through the window, she watched the buggy depart in a cloud of dust.
"Is she gone?"
Grace whispered.
"Yes, sweetheart. Don't worry about her."
But Maggie did worry. She'd dealt with women like Mrs. Thornton before, and they could make life very difficult. Still, she had a job to do. Dinner was her masterpiece roast beef with gravy, mashed potatoes, green beans she'd found in jars in the pantry, and fresh bread. She'd even managed a cake with the last of her hoarded sugar. The men's appreciation was louder this time, several openly complimenting the meal. Even Coulter, though he said nothing, cleaned his plate and accepted a second slice of cake. As the hands filtered out, Tom lingered.
"Heard you had a visitor today."
News traveled fast on a ranch. Mrs. Thornton came to express her concerns about propriety. Tom snorted. "That Biddy's been trying to run everyone's life since her husband got rich. Don't pay her no mind." "I'm afraid it won't be that simple." "Maybe not," he agreed. "But the boss won't care what she thinks. And the men, well, ma'am, you've won them over with your cooking. That counts for something out here." After he left, Maggie stood alone in the kitchen, surveying her domain. The 3-day trial was 1/3 complete. She'd fed them well, handled the first social challenge, kept her children in line. Tomorrow would bring new tests. She was sure. As she banked the stove's fires for the night, she heard footsteps on the porch. Coulter Vane stood at the door, looking uncomfortable. "Mr. Vane." "The meal was satisfactory," he said stiffly. "Breakfast at 5. "Of course." He started to turn away, then paused. "Mrs. Thornton's opinions don't carry weight on this ranch." Before she could respond, he was gone, his boots echoing across the yard. Maggie allowed herself a small smile. Perhaps she'd found something here after all, not just a job, but a place where judgment took second place to hard work. She made her way back to the cabin where her children waited, the night air cool on her face. Through the windows of the main house, she could see Coulter's silhouette at his desk, working by lamplight, a lonely figure in a big house, just as she was a lonely figure trying to hold her family together. But tonight, at least, they'd all eaten well. Sometimes that was enough. Tomorrow would come with its own challenges. She'd need supplies from town, which meant facing more Mrs. Thorntons. The children would need to start school soon, another battle to fight, and always, the specter of gossip and propriety hanging over them all. But as she tucked Henry into bed and listened to James and Grace whisper about their day's adventures, Maggie felt something she hadn't experienced in months: hope, small and fragile as a candle flame, but real nonetheless. The Double V Ranch might not be home yet, but it was a start. The desert night wrapped around the ranch like a velvet glove dotted with diamonds. It was 2 weeks since Maggie Hartley had arrived at the Double V, and the evening routine had settled into comfortable predictability. Supper was done, dishes washed, children tucked into bed. This was her time, a precious hour before exhaustion claimed her. She sat on the cabin's small porch, mending one of Henry's shirts by lamplight. The repetitive motion of the needle soothed her, as did the night sound's crickets, a distant coyote, the soft nickering of horses in the corral. Evenings are peaceful here, she startled, pricking her finger with the needle. Coulter Vane stood at the edge of the porch light, a shadow among shadows. "Mr. Vane, I didn't hear you approach." "Lifetime of practice." He gestured to the empty chair beside her. "May I? It's your property." "It's your porch for now." But he sat, stretching his long legs out before him. For a moment, they existed in surprisingly comfortable silence. "You're doing well here," he said finally. "The men haven't eaten this good since—" He trailed off. But she knew. Since Martha— "Thank you." She kept her eyes on her sewing. "The children seem happy. Henry's already made friends with that barn cat, and Grace has been helping old Sam with the vegetable garden. And James—" She smiled. "James thinks he's ready to ride with the men. Tom's been very patient with his questions. The boy's got a good head on his shoulders. Responsible. Too responsible sometimes." The words slipped out before she could stop them. "He tries to be the man his father was." Coulter was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't respond. Then, "How did it happen, your husband?" Maggie's hands stilled on the fabric. She'd told the lie so many times it came easily now. "Wagon accident. The axle broke on a mountain road outside Denver. He was thrown." But tonight, under the vast New Mexico sky, with this taciturn man who knew about loss, the lie tasted like ash. "No," she heard herself say. "That's what I tell people. The truth is harder." Coulter waited, patient as the mountains. His name was Daniel. He was complicated, charming when he wanted something, cold when he didn't get it. He had dreams bigger than his abilities and blamed everyone else when they didn't come true. She took a shaky breath. "He got involved with some men in Denver, convinced they had a scheme that would make us rich. When it went bad, when they came to collect—" She stopped, unable to continue. "He ran. He tried to. They caught him outside Pueblo. I identified what was left." Her voice was steady now, emptied of emotion. "The boarding house I worked at, where we lived. It burned down the next week. I've always wondered if that was coincidence." "So you ran too?" "I had 3 children to protect. Yes, I ran." She lifted her chin, meeting his eyes in the lamplight. "Does that shock you?" "No." His voice was quiet. "It makes you smart and brave." They sat in silence again, but it was different now, charged with shared understanding. Finally. Coulter reached into his vest pocket and pulled out something small and white. This was Martha's. It was a handkerchief, delicate linen edged with lace, the initials M.V. embroidered in one corner. "She made dozens of them," he continued. "Said a lady should always have a clean handkerchief. I've been carrying this one since—" He cleared his throat. "I'd like you to have it." Maggie stared at the small square of fabric. "I couldn't. It's too personal." Martha would have liked you, would have liked knowing another M was making use of it. He placed it on the arm of her chair and stood. "It's just a handkerchief, Mrs. Hartley, not a proposal." The dry humor surprised her into a small laugh. "Thank you," she said softly. He'd made it to the edge of the porch when she called out, "Coulter!" He turned, and she saw his surprise at her use of his first name. "What happened to Martha, if you don't mind my asking?" His face closed like a slammed door, and she immediately regretted the question. But then he spoke. Words pulled from some deep place. "Pneumonia, 2 winters ago. She was always delicate, but she loved this place, loved the wildness of it. When the fever came—" He shrugged, a gesture that said everything and nothing. "Doctor said she'd have lived longer in a softer climate. Maybe so, but she'd have been miserable."
She was lucky, Maggie said, to be so loved, to have someone who understood her so well.
I failed her.
No. The word came out firm, almost harsh. No, you didn't fail her by letting her live where she was happy. The world fails us sometimes. Disease, accidents, violent men, they fail us. But loving someone enough to let them be who they are, that's not failure. He stood very still, and she wondered if she'd overstepped. Then he nodded once, sharply, and strode away into the darkness. Maggie sat for a long time after he left, holding Martha's handkerchief. The linen was soft with age and handling, and she wondered how many times Coulter had touched it in the past 2 years, carrying his grief in his pocket like a stone. She understood. She had her own stones. Daniel's watch that she couldn't bear to sell, the photograph of him with the children when Henry was just a baby, before everything went wrong. We carry our dead with us, she thought, in objects and memories and the spaces they leave behind. A sound made her look up. James stood in the doorway, sleep-tousled and young in his nightshirt. Can't sleep. He came to sit beside her, folding his long legs up like a grasshopper. I heard voices. Mr. Vane stopped by. James was quiet for a moment. He's not like Papa, is he? The question hit her like a physical blow. No, she managed. He's not. Good. James leaned against her shoulder, something he rarely did anymore. Papa was loud. Even when he was quiet, he was loud, like thunder waiting to happen. How much had her boy seen? How much had she failed to shield him from? Mr. Vane is more like the mountains, James continued. Quiet, but solid, safe. We don't know him well enough to know if he's safe, Maggie cautioned, even as her heart agreed with her son's assessment. I know enough. James yawned. Tom says he's the most honorable man in the territory. Says he'd trust him with his life. Has trusted him with his life. When did Tom say all this? When I've been helping with the horses, Tom tells stories. Another yawn. Says Mr. Vane saved his life once, down in Mexico. Says he's never told the story because Mr. Vane doesn't like people knowing about the good he does. Maggie filed this information away. Time for bed, young man. James stood, then surprised her by kissing her cheek. I'm glad we came here. Mama, it feels right. After he'd gone, she sat a while longer, thinking about Martha's handkerchief, about men who carried their grief quietly, about boys who saw more than their mothers realized. The night wind carried the scent of sage and possibility. Inside the main house, she could see Coulter moving past the windows. Did he regret his openness? Would tomorrow bring a return to the stiff formality of employer and employee? She hoped not. For the first time in years, she'd spoken truthfully about Daniel, and the sky hadn't fallen. Coulter hadn't looked at her with disgust or pity. He'd simply accepted her truth as she'd accepted his. The moon rose higher, painting the desert in silver and shadow. Somewhere in the distance, a nighthawk called. Maggie carefully folded Martha's handkerchief and tucked it into her pocket. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges. She needed to go to town for supplies, face down the misses, Thorntons of the world. But tonight, she'd shared truth with another wounded soul and found understanding instead of judgment. She rose, gathering her sewing. Through the window, she could see her children sleeping. James sprawled across his cot. Grace curled up like a cat. Henry with his thumb in his mouth, though he'd die of embarrassment if anyone mentioned it. They were building something here. Fragile as bird bones, but real. Not just employment, but connection. Not just shelter, but perhaps, eventually, home. The lamp flickered as she turned it down. In the main house, Coulter's light still burned. 2 souls awake in the darkness, each carrying their own losses, but perhaps, just perhaps, no longer quite so alone. She touched the handkerchief in her pocket once more. Martha Vane had loved this wild place, had made a life here despite being delicate as lace. If she could do it,
Maybe a boarding house cook with 3 children and a past full of shadows could too. The desert night sang its ancient song as Maggie went inside. Tomorrow would come soon enough, with its work and worries. But tonight had brought an unexpected gift, the beginning of trust, offered as quietly as a handkerchief across the darkness. In the main house, Coulter stood at his window, watching the cabin. For 2 years, he'd moved through his days like a ghost, existing but not living. Tonight, for the first time, he'd spoken Martha's name without feeling like he was drowning. The woman, Maggie, he allowed himself to think had lost too, but she hadn't let it stop her. She'd packed up her children and her courage and walked into the unknown. There was a lesson there, if he was brave enough to learn it. He turned away from the window, Martha's handkerchief no longer weighing his pocket like a stone. She'd given it away, and somehow that felt right. Martha would have approved, would have liked the straight-backed widow who cooked like an angel and faced down social censure without flinching. The night deepened. On the Double V Ranch, 2 wounded hearts began the slow, tentative process of learning to beat again. It wasn't love, not yet. It was something both more fragile and more necessary. The first green shoot of hope pushing through ground that had seemed forever frozen. And in the vast New Mexico sky, the stars looked down on it all. Ancient witnesses to the endless human story of loss, survival, and the courage to begin again. The gunshot cracked across the canyon like thunder breaking drought. Coulter's mare screamed and reared as he felt the burn of lead tearing through his side, just below the ribs. His vision blurred, but instinct kept him in the saddle as he wheeled the horse around, looking for cover. Rustlers. Tom had said that morning. Spotted tracks heading toward Box Canyon, probably after the horses we've been grazing there. Coulter had gone alone despite Tom's protests. It should have been a simple scouting run. Should have been. Another shot whistled past his ear. He could see them now, 3 riders emerging from the rocks like scorpions from their holes. His rifle was in its scabbard, but drawing it would mean releasing his grip on the wound that was already soaking his shirt with warm wetness. The mare needed no urging. She ran like her tail was on fire, heading for home with the instinct of a creature that knew where safety lay. Coulter held on, his world narrowing to the rhythm of hoofbeats and the sticky warmth spreading across his side. Time became elastic. One moment he was clinging to the saddle horn. The next he was somehow in the ranch yard with Tom and Pete running toward him, their face masks of alarm. "Get him inside," Tom barked. "Pete, ride for the doctor." "No!" Coulter's voice came out rougher than intended. "No, doctor. Too far. He'll never make it in time." "Then what?" "Mrs. Hartley." The words cost him, but he got them out. "She worked a boarding house. She'll have seen wounds before." Tom didn't argue further. They half-carried, half-dragged him not to the main house, but to the kitchen where Maggie was already clearing the table. Alerted by the commotion, she took one look at the blood and transformed. Gone was the quiet widow. In her place stood a woman of decisive action. "On the table," she ordered. "James, get my sewing basket. Grace, take Henry to the cabin and stay there. Now!" The children scattered. Coulter found himself on his back on the same table where he'd eaten breakfast, staring up at smoke-blackened rafters while Maggie's hands, cut away his shirt with steady efficiency. "Bullet still in there?" she said, probing with gentle fingers that nevertheless sent fire through his body. "But it didn't hit anything vital. You're lucky." "Don't feel lucky," he ground out. "Tom, I need hot water. Lots of it. And whiskey, the good stuff. Not that rot-gut the hands drink. Clean cloths. And find me a thin knife." "You've done this before." It wasn't a question. Her green eyes met his briefly. "Denver was a rough town. Board and room didn't always pay the bills. I helped the doctor when needed." She worked in silence after that, cleaning the wound with whiskey that burned like hellfire. Coulter bit down on the leather strap Tom offered, tasting salt and old sweat as Maggie probed for the bullet. "There!" Satisfaction colored her voice as she held up the bloody lead. Now the real work begins. The needle felt like a branding iron as she stitched him up. Each passed through flesh a fresh agony, but her hands never shook. Her concentration never wavered. He found himself watching her face, the small line that appeared between her brows when she focused, the way she caught her bottom lip between her teeth. "Almost done," she murmured.
"You're handling this well."
"Had worse."
"I can see that."
Her fingers ghosted over an old scar on his ribs.
"Knife."
"Apache 10 years ago. And this, another scar. This one on his shoulder. Comanche. You've led an interesting life, Mr. Vane."
"Coulter,"
he corrected, then wondered why it mattered. She smiled slightly.
"Hold still. Coulter. Last stitch."
When she was done, she wrapped the wound with clean bandages, her touch impersonal now, nurse-like. But when she helped him sit up, her hand lingered on his shoulder for just a moment. "You'll need to rest. No riding for at least a week." "Can't. Ranch doesn't run itself."
"The ranch won't run at all if you're dead."
Her voice turned sharp.
"That wound was a hair's breadth from your liver. You'll rest, or I'll have Tom tie you to a bed."
"You're giving me orders now?" "On medical matters, yes." She began cleaning up, movements efficient. "You hired me to cook. Patching up stubborn ranchers comes extra." Despite the pain, he almost smiled. "Bill me." Tom helped him to the main house, to his own bed for the first time in months. He'd been sleeping in the small room off his study, unable to face the emptiness of the master bedroom. But Maggie was right. The stairs to his usual spot would be agony. She appeared an hour later with a tray broth, bread, and a tea that smelled bitter as wormwood.
"Willow bark,"
she explained, helping him sit up.
"For the pain and to keep fever away."
"Tastes like death." "Most medicine does." She watched him drink it anyway. "Tom says you went alone after rustlers. That was foolish. My ranch, my responsibility. Your death would be everyone's loss." The words seemed to surprise her. Color rose in her cheeks.
"The hands. I mean, they depend on you."
"Just the hands." She busied herself with the tray, not meeting his eyes. "Your son will want to see you're all right. He and my James have become friends."
"My son?"
Now she did look at him, puzzled. "Henry, he follows you around like a shadow when you're in the yard. Surely you've noticed."
"Henry's your son?"
"Yes, and he's decided you hung the moon." She shook her head. "Children are quick to attach themselves. I've told him not to bother you." "He doesn't bother me." The admission surprised him.
"He reminds me—" "Of what?"
But he couldn't say it. Of the child Martha had been carrying when the fever took her. Of the son he'd never gotten to meet. To teach about horses and cattle and the way the desert looked at dawn.
"You should rest,"
Maggie said softly, reading something in his face. "I'll check on you in a few hours." But sleep wouldn't come. The pain was part of it. But more was the memory of her hands on his skin, gentle and competent. The way she'd taken charge without hesitation. The fierce look in her eyes when she'd ordered him to rest. Martha had been gentle as morning mist, needing protection from the harsh realities of ranch life. Maggie was different. She faced those realities head on, unflinching. It was unsettling. He wouldn't think about what it was. Evening painted the room in shades of gold and shadow when he woke to voices in the hallway. Could have died out there? Maggie's voice, tight with something that sounded like anger or fear. But he didn't. Tom, reasonable as always. "Thanks to you." He went alone. What kind of man goes after rustlers alone? The kind who's been punishing himself for 2 years. Silence. Then Maggie again. Quieter. He's not responsible for her death. Try telling him that. He's carried that weight since the day she died. Blames himself for bringing her here. For not taking her back east when she got sick. Guilt is a luxury the living can't afford. Her voice turned brisk.
I'll sit with him tonight. Make sure fever doesn't set in. That's not proper, ma'am. What would people say? Since when has propriety saved anyone's life? The door opened, and she entered, carrying another tray and a basket of mending. She stopped when she saw he was awake. How do you feel? Like I've been shot. At least you haven't lost your sense of humor. She set the tray on the bedside table. More tea and some soup if you can manage it. I can manage. She helped him sit up, and he caught her scent, soap and vanilla and something uniquely her. This close. He could see the faint freckles across her nose, the way her hair was already escaping its severe pins. You don't have to stay, he said. I do, actually. She settled into the chair beside the bed, pulling out her mending. Bullet wounds can turn septic quickly. Someone needs to watch for fever. They sat in surprisingly comfortable silence as darkness gathered outside. She worked on what looked like one of Grace's dresses, her needle flashing in the lamplight. He dozed between cups of bitter tea and spoonfuls of soup. Why did Martha give you that handkerchief? She asked suddenly. The one you gave me. He considered not answering, but something about the quiet room, the soft light, her presence, loosened his tongue. She said I worried too much, said I needed something to remind me that gentle things could survive out here. He shifted, wincing at the pull of stitches. She was wrong about that. Was she? Maggie's hand stilled on the fabric. Seems to me she survived just fine until the sickness came. That's not the land's fault, or yours. If we'd lived in town, she'd have been miserable. You said so yourself. She resumed sewing, each stitch precise. My Daniel promised me a life of ease, promised we'd have servants and a fine house and I'd never have to work again. You know what? I'd have traded all those promises for a man who knew who I really was and loved me anyway. The words hung between them like a challenge, or an invitation. You must miss him, Coulter said carefully. She was quiet so long he thought she wouldn't answer. Then, I miss who I thought he was. I miss who I tried to be for him. But the real man, no. I stopped missing him long before he died. It was the most honest thing anyone had said to him in years. I miss Martha every day, he admitted. But sometimes I wonder if I miss her or just the idea of her. Does that make me a terrible husband? It makes you human. She set aside the mending and checked his bandages with cool fingers. We're allowed to love imperfectly, Coulter. We're allowed to grieve imperfectly, too. His name on her lips sent something through him that had nothing to do with the wound. Maggie? Her name came out rougher than intended. She went very still, her hand still resting on the bandages. In the lamplight, her eyes were deep as forest pools. For a moment, the air between them crackled with possibility. Then she stepped back, busying herself with a tray. You should sleep. I'll be right here if you need anything. But sleep was the farthest thing from his mind as he watched her settle back into the chair, taking up her mending again. The lamplight caught the threads of silver in her dark hair, turned her profile into something from a Renaissance painting. He'd been dead inside for 2 years, going through the motions of living without feeling anything real. But now, with a bullet wound in his side and this remarkable woman keeping vigil beside his bed, something long frozen began to thaw. It terrified him. It exhilarated him. It made him feel like the worst kind of betrayer and the luckiest man alive all at once. Maggie? Thank you. She looked up, and her smile was like sunrise after the longest night. You're welcome. Outside, the night wind sang through the cottonwoods. Inside, 2 people sat in lamplight silence, stitching together more than just torn flesh. With every breath, every shared glance, every comfortable silence, they wove something new from the threads of their broken pasts. It wasn't love, not yet, but it was the beginning of something that might, given time and courage, grow into love. And that was enough. For tonight, it was more than enough. The storm hit just after midnight, rolling across the desert like God's own fury.
Lightning split the sky in jagged tears, while thunder shook the ranch buildings to their foundations. Rain came not in drops, but in sheets, turning the dusty ground to mud in minutes. Maggie woke to the sound of her children crying. Henry had crawled into Grace's bed, both of them huddled together while James stood at the window, trying to look brave despite his white knuckles gripping the sill. "It's just a storm," she soothed, gathering them close. "We've weathered worse." But this was different. The wind howled like a living thing, and through the chaos, she heard something else, the sharp crack of breaking timber. "The barn!" James pressed his face to the glass. "Mama, the barn's breaking apart!" Before she could stop him, he was running for the door. "The horses! We have to save the horses!" "James, no!" But he was already gone into the tempest. Maggie didn't think. She shoved her feet into boots, grabbed her shawl, and plunged after him into the maelstrom. The rain hit like fists, driving her back, but she pushed forward. Lightning illuminated the scene in terrible flashes. The barn roof half collapsed. Horses screaming, men running through the mud. "James!" Her voice was swallowed by the wind. She found him trying to lead a panicked mare from the wreckage, the horse rearing and plunging. Tom Briggs grabbed the boy, pulling him clear just as a beam crashed down where he'd been standing. "Get him inside!" Tom shouted over the storm. But now she could hear something else, a child's voice, high and terrified. "Help! Someone help!" Henry! Oh God! Henry had followed them out. She spun, searching desperately through the rain and chaos. There, a small figure trapped beneath a section of fallen wall, the wind-driven debris piling up around him. Maggie ran, slipping in the mud, her heart hammering against her ribs. She reached Henry just as another section of roof began to give way above them. No time to pull him free, only to throw herself over his small body as the world came crashing down. The weight drove her to her knees. Wood and shingles rained down, something sharp raking across her back. She curled tighter around Henry, feeling him sob against her chest. Then strong hands were pulling the debris away. Coulter's voice, rough with fear and pain. "Hold on, just hold on." He shouldn't be here. He could barely walk with his wound, but he was here, throwing aside broken boards with desperate strength. Tom appeared beside him, then Pete and old Sam, all of them working frantically. "Got them!" Tom lifted Henry while Coulter pulled Maggie free. She tried to stand, but her legs wouldn't cooperate. The world tilted sideways. "Henry." "He's safe." Coulter's arms were around her, holding her up. "You saved him." They stumbled toward the main house. A strange procession through the storm. Someone had lit lanterns, turning the windows into beacons. Grace stood in the doorway, tears streaming down her face as she saw her brother in Tom's arms. "Inside, everyone inside," Coulter ordered. The kitchen became a makeshift infirmary. Henry had cuts and bruises, but nothing serious. Thanks to Maggie's protection, she'd taken the worst of it. A gash on her shoulder, splinters embedded in her hands, her ankle twisted and already swelling. "Your turn to be doctored," Coulter said grimly, easing her into a chair. "You shouldn't be up," she protested. "Your wound is the least of my concerns." His hands were gentle as he examined her injuries, but she could see the cost in the tight lines around his mouth, the careful way he moved. "Tom, get the medical supplies. James, heat water. Grace, find clean cloths." The children scattered to their tasks, grateful for something to do. Henry clung to Maggie's good hand, his face pale but determined. "I'm sorry, Mama. I just wanted to help." "Shh, baby, you're safe." "That's all that matters." Coulter worked in silence, cleaning her wounds with the same steady competence she'd shown with his. When he reached the gash on her shoulder, he had to cut away part of her nightgown. His fingers hesitated. "It's all right," she said softly. "Nothing you haven't seen before on a ranch." But this was different, and they both knew it. This was her skin under his hands, her pain he was trying to ease. When he began stitching the wound, she bit her lip to keep from crying out. "Almost done," he murmured. "You're braver than most cowboys I know." "Cowboys don't have children to protect." His hands stilled for a moment. "No, they don't." The storm began to ease as he wrapped her shoulder, the thunder rolling away toward the mountains, through the window. Dawn was just beginning to streak the sky, revealing the devastation in the yard. "The barn's gone," Tom reported, coming in soaked and muddy. "Lost some lumber and feed, but we got all the horses out, thanks to young James here raising the alarm." James flushed at the praise, but his eyes were on his mother. "I'm sorry, Mama, I shouldn't have run out." "You wanted to help," she said, reaching for him with her good arm. "That's not something to apologize for. But next time, we plan before we act. Yes." "Yes, ma'am." Coulter finished wrapping her ankle, his touch lingering for just a moment. "You need rest. The cabin took some damage. You'll all stay in the main house until we can repair it. We couldn't impose—" "It's not an imposition." His voice brooked no argument. "There are plenty of rooms. Mrs. Vane would have—" He stopped, swallowed. "Martha would have insisted." It was the first time he'd said her name so easily, without the weight of grief choking the words. Tom and the other hands dispersed to assess the damage and begin cleanup. Coulter carried Henry upstairs himself. Despite Maggie's protests about his injury, she limped after them, leaning on James, while Grace darted ahead to explore. The house was even larger than she'd realized, with wide hallways and rooms that hadn't seen use in years. Coulter settled them in a suite near his own room, a sitting room with 2 bedrooms attached. "This is too much," Maggie said, taking in the fine furniture, the velvet drapes. "It's practical." He countered. "I need to check your wounds. And you need to check mine. Easier if we're not traipsing across the ranch." After he left, she sat on the elegant bed, feeling out of place. Her children, however, adapted quickly. Henry bounced on his bed until she told him to stop. Grace examined everything with curious fingers, and James stood at the window watching the cleanup efforts below. "Will we live here now?" Grace asked. "Just until our cabin is repaired." But even as she said it, something in her heart whispered that changes were coming, as inevitable as the storm that had just passed. She must have dozed, because she woke to find Coulter in the chair beside her bed, a book open in his lap. The late afternoon light caught the silver in his hair, softened the harsh lines of his face. "How do you feel?" he asked, setting the book aside. "Sore, but alive." She struggled to sit up. "The children?" "Fed and helping with the cleanup. Tom's keeping an eye on them." He leaned forward. "Maggie, what you did, throwing yourself over Henry like that. Any mother would have done the same." "No." His voice was fierce. "Not any mother. You didn't hesitate, didn't calculate. You just acted. He's my son. And you're—" He stopped, ran a hand through his hair. "You're remarkable." The word hung between them, weighted with meaning. She could see him struggling with something, the words fighting to get out. "Coulter, I stood in that door during the storm," he said quietly. "Watched you run into danger for your boy, and all I could think was that I couldn't lose you, not you too." Her heart stuttered. "Coulter, I know it's too soon. I know you're still grieving, and I'm a mess of a man who doesn't know how to let go of the past. But Maggie, these past weeks, having you here, seeing you with your children, the way you've brought life back to this place." She reached out, covered his hand with hers. "I know." "You do." "I feel it too." The admission came out barely above a whisper. "It terrifies me." "Good." His smile was crooked. "Then we're both terrified together." A knock interrupted whatever might have come next. Tom stuck his head in, grinning. "Sorry to interrupt, but thought you'd want to know.
The town's heard about our storm damage. Mrs. Thornton herself is organizing a barn raising for next week. And Mrs. Thornton? Maggie couldn't hide her shock. Seems saving young Henry changed some minds about you. Ma'am, nothing like a mother's courage to shut up gossiping tongues. Tom's grin widened. Plus, half the town owes Coulter favors. Time to collect. After he left, Coulter and Maggie sat in companionable silence. Outside, she could hear the sounds of repair beginning, her children's voices mixed with the ranch hand's deeper tones. A barn raising, she mused. I haven't been to one since Virginia. It's how we do things out here. Coulter said, neighbors help neighbors, even when they don't particularly like each other. And do they like each other? He squeezed her hand gently. They're learning to... The next days passed in a blur of activity. The ranch bustled with repairs. And true to Tom's word, people began arriving from town with supplies and offers of help. Even Mrs. Thornton appeared, stiff-backed but gracious, to personally invite Maggie to the Ladies' Auxiliary Planning Committee. For the barn-raising lunch, she explained, we could use someone with your practical experience. It wasn't quite an apology, but it was a beginning. The night before the barn raising, Maggie found herself again on the porch, but this time at the main house, Coulter joined her, moving easier now, though still careful of his healing wound. Tomorrow will be chaos, he warned. Half the territory will show up. I'm ready for it, she smiled. Though I never imagined I'd be planning a social event with Mrs. Edward Thornton. People surprise you sometimes. He was quiet for a moment. Maggie, after tomorrow, after the barn's up and things settle, we need to talk about the future. The future. Yours, mine, maybe... He took a breath. Maybe ours. Before she could respond, small feet pattered on the porch. Henry appeared, trailing his blanket, eyes puffy with sleep. Bad dream? Maggie asked, opening her arms. He nodded, burrowing against her, but his eyes were on Coulter. After a moment's hesitation, he reached out one small hand to the rancher. Coulter froze, then, slowly, carefully, he took the boy's hand in his much larger one. It's all right, son, he said roughly. Just a dream. You're safe here. Henry studied him solemnly. You saved Mama and me. Your mama saved you. I just helped a little. Will you stay with us until the bad dreams go away? Maggie's breath caught, but Coulter just shifted closer, until the three of them sat together on the porch step, Henry safe between them. I'll stay, Coulter promised, as long as you need me. As the stars came out overhead, Maggie felt something settle in her chest. This was what she'd been looking for without knowing it. Not just a job or shelter, but this family cobbled together from broken pieces, love growing slowly in the desert soil. Tomorrow would bring the barn raising and all the complications of their small community. There would be questions to answer, decisions to make, futures to plan. But tonight, there was just a woman, a man, and a child, holding back the darkness together. It was enough. It was everything. It was home. The barn raising had been a triumph. The entire community had come together, transforming destruction into renewal. For 3 days, the Double V Ranch had buzzed with activity, laughter, and the gradual thawing of social frost around Maggie and her children. She'd thought they'd finally found their place. Then William Hartley arrived. He came on a Thursday afternoon, riding a black stallion with the confidence of a man who expected the world to bend to his will. Maggie was in the garden with Grace, teaching her to tell weeds from vegetables. When the stranger dismounted at the main house, something about his bearing made her stomach clench with unease. When he turned and she saw his face, the basket of vegetables tumbled from nerveless fingers. No, she breathed. Grace looked up, startled. Mama, what's wrong?
But Maggie was already moving, shooing Grace toward the house.
Go find your brothers. Stay inside until I come for you.
But Mama. Now, Grace. The child ran. Sensing her mother's fear, Maggie forced herself to walk steadily across the yard, her mind racing. William Hartley, Daniel's older brother, the last person she'd expected to see in New Mexico. He spotted her before she could retreat, his face lighting with a smile that didn't reach his cold blue eyes. Margaret. What a delightful surprise. William. She kept her distance, hands clenched in her apron. What are you doing here? Looking for you, of course, and my dear brother's children. He glanced around the ranch with an appraising eye. You've done well for yourself. When I heard a widow Hartley had taken employment here, I hardly dared hope it was you. Coulter emerged from the house, took one look at Maggie's face, and moved to stand beside her. Can I help you, sir? William's smile widened. You must be Mr. Vane. I'm William Hartley, Margaret's brother-in-law. I've come to collect my family. Your family? Coulter's voice was dangerously quiet. My brother's widow and children. Yes, they've been through such hardship since Daniel's passing. When I learned of their circumstances, I came immediately. That's very generous, Coulter said carefully. But Mrs. Hartley has employment here. She and the children are doing fine. William's eyes hardened, though his smile remained. I'm sure she's grateful for your charity, but surely you understand. A woman of her station working as a cook, living on a ranch with unmarried men, it's highly inappropriate. I've come to take them somewhere more suitable. I decide what's suitable for my children, Maggie said, finding her voice at last. Do you? William turned to her with false concern. My dear, you're clearly overwhelmed. Daniel would be horrified to see his family in such circumstances. But don't worry. I've made arrangements. There's a lovely position for you in my household in Chicago. The children will have proper schooling, advantages you can't provide here. As your servant, you mean? His mask slipped for just a moment, revealing something ugly beneath. As a member of the family who knows her place. Tom Briggs had appeared, along with several other hands, drawn by the tension in the yard. Old Sam leaned against the barn, whittling with studied casualness. His rifle happened to be propped nearby. Mr. Hartley, Coulter said. Mrs. Hartley has a good position here. The children are thriving. I don't see any reason for them to leave. With respect, Mr. Vane, this is a family matter. William's voice carried the authority of a man used to being obeyed. I have a legal and moral obligation to my late brother's family. Legal? Maggie's heart sank. William produced a document from his coat. Daniel named me guardian of his children in the event of his death. Standard practice between brothers. I've been searching for months, following rumors and stories. Imagine my relief when I finally tracked you down. Daniel never told me. Daniel did many things without telling you, didn't he? The words were silk-wrapped poison. But legal documents don't lie. I am the children's guardian. You, my dear sister, are welcome to accompany them. Or not. Your choice. You're lying. But even as she said it, she remembered Daniel's secretive nature, his love of control. It would be just like him to arrange their lives even from beyond the grave. The sheriff in town can verify the documents, William said smoothly. Shall we ride there together? Tomorrow. Coulter interjected. It's late, and Mrs. Hartley needs time to consider. You're welcome to a room for the night. William's eyes narrowed, but he nodded graciously. Of course, I'm not an unreasonable man. We'll settle this properly tomorrow. As Tom showed William to a guest room, Coulter steered Maggie into his study, closing the door firmly behind them. He can't take them, she said immediately, pacing the small space like a caged animal. He can't. You don't understand what he's like. Daniel was charming and weak,
But William is cruel. He wanted me to marry him first. You know, when I chose Daniel, he never forgave either of us.
We'll fight this, Coulter said firmly. I'll wire my lawyer in Santa Fe.
You don't understand. If those documents are real.
Documents can be challenged, especially if there's evidence of unfitness. He caught her shoulders, stilling her frantic movement.
Maggie, look at me. I won't let him take you or the children. Do you trust me?
She searched his face, seeing determination that matched her desperation.
Yes.
Then we plan. Tell me everything about William Hartley. They talked until well past midnight, Maggie revealing the ugly history between the brothers, William's obsession with controlling the family fortune, his fury when Daniel had gambled most of it away. The children had stayed hidden all evening, understanding with the instinct of young animals that danger had entered their safe haven. The next morning dawned clear and cold. William appeared at breakfast impeccably dressed, treating everyone to stories of his success in Chicago while watching Maggie with the patience of a cat at a mouse hole. "Shall we visit the sheriff now?" he asked pleasantly as the meal concluded. They made a strange procession into town, William on his black stallion, Coulter and Maggie in the wagon with Tom driving, half the ranch hands trailing behind like an honor guard. The children remained at the ranch under old Sam's watchful eye. Sheriff Morrison, a fair man who'd known Coulter since territorial days, examined the documents with a deepening frown. "These appear to be in order?" "Coulter, signed, witnessed, all legal-like." "The man hasn't seen those children in 2 years." Coulter argued. "He doesn't know them, hasn't supported them." "That's not true," William interrupted smoothly. "I've been searching for them ever since I learned of my brother's tragic death. Margaret disappeared without word, taking the children from their rightful home. One might almost call it kidnapping." Maggie's hands clenched in her lap. "I was protecting them." "From their loving uncle, really? Margaret, these dramatics are beneath you." "Enough." The sheriff held up a hand. "This is a matter for a judge. Circuit judge will be through in 2 weeks. Until then, the children stay where they are." "Unacceptable," William snapped, his genial mask finally cracking. "Those children belong with family, not with strangers in some backwater ranch." "Mr. Hartley." Coulter stood slowly, and something in his movement made William step back. "Those children have a home at the Double V. They have people who care for them. They have their mother. That's where they'll stay until a judge says otherwise. And if the judge agrees with me, which he will, then we'll deal with that when it comes." The ride back was silent, tension crackling between the two men like lightning before a storm. At the ranch, William retired to his room, but Maggie had no illusions he was resting. He was planning, just as they were. That night, she tucked her children in with extra care, memorizing their faces. James, trying so hard to be strong. Grace, clutching her doll with white knuckles. Henry, too young to fully understand, but sensing the fear that ran through the house like a poisoned stream. "Are we leaving, Mama?" Grace whispered. "Oh, not if I can help it, baby." "I don't want to go with that man," Henry said. "He smells wrong." Out of the mouths of babes, Maggie thought. William did smell wrong. Expensive cologne over something rotten. She found Coulter on the porch, staring into the darkness. Without speaking, she sat beside him, drawing comfort from his solid presence. "We could run," she said quietly. "Tonight, take the children and disappear again." "No." His voice was firm. "You've run enough. This is your home now. We stand and fight, even if we lose." He turned to her then, and in his eyes she saw something that took her breath away. "We won't lose. I've already sent Tom to Santa Fe with an urgent message for Judge Carter. He owes me favors. And I've wired Denver for information about William's business dealings. Men like him always have secrets. And if that's not enough, Then I'll make it enough. He took her hand, enveloping it in his larger one. Maggie, I need you to know something. These past months, you and the children, you've brought this place back to life. Brought me back to life. I won't let him destroy that. Coulter, I know it's too soon. I know you're not ready to hear this. But I love you. Maggie Hartley, I love your courage and your strength and the way you hum when you're cooking. I love how you've made my men into better versions of themselves just by expecting them to be. I love your children like they were my own. Tears ran down her face. I love you too, but love might not be enough. He silenced her with a kiss, gentle but full of promise. Love is always enough. We just have to be smart about how we use it. Inside the house, William Hartley stood at his window, watching the couple on the porch. His lips curved in a cold smile. They thought they could fight him. They had no idea what he was capable of. He'd waited too long, searched too hard, to let some frontier rancher steal what was rightfully his. The children were secondary, useful for controlling Margaret, but secondary. It was her he wanted, had always wanted. His weak fool of a brother had stolen her once. That wouldn't happen again. He fingered the telegram in his pocket, the one offering a significant sum for information about a certain widow who'd fled Denver with stolen money. Amazing what stories could be crafted with a few carefully placed bribes. By the time the circuit judge arrived, Margaret would be begging to leave with him to protect her precious reputation, and this time, there would be no escape. In the barn, old Sam cleaned his rifle with methodical care, while Tom Briggs wrote another telegram to send at dawn. The ranch hands had already chosen sides, and it wasn't with the smooth-talking stranger who looked at their missus, Hartley like she was property. The Double V had weathered storms, droughts, and raiders. It would weather William Hartley, too. The battle lines were drawn. Now, all that remained was to see who would strike first, and who would be left standing when the dust settled. The Dusty Moon Saloon had seen its share of confrontations, but none quite like this. Coulter pushed through the bat-wing doors with the controlled fury of a man who'd reached his limit. The afternoon crowd fell silent, sensing trouble in the set of his shoulders and the ice in his gray eyes. William Hartley sat at a corner table, holding court with several town merchants, spinning his tales of Chicago prosperity and family obligation. He looked up as Coulter approached, his smile never wavering. Mr. Vane, come to discuss terms of surrender. Stand up. The words cut through the saloon's hush like a blade. William's smile finally faltered. I beg your pardon. You heard me. Coulter's voice carried the quiet menace of distant thunder. Stand up and face me like a man, instead of spreading your poison behind closed doors. William rose slowly, adjusting his silk vest. If you're referring to my conversations with concerned citizens about my sister-in-law's unfortunate circumstances, I'm referring to the lies you've been telling. About stolen money, about Maggie running from the law. Coulter pulled a telegram from his pocket. Funny thing about lies, Hartley, they unravel when you pull the right thread. The saloon patrons leaned in, sensing drama better than any traveling show. I've merely shared my concerns. You've shared fabrications. Tom Briggs entered, flanked by Sheriff Morrison. We've got statements from Denver, from the boarding house owner, the bank, even the police. Mrs. Hartley left that city with nothing but her children and the clothes on their backs. No stolen money, no warrants, just a widow running from her husband's debts and dangerous associates. Color drained from William's face. You can't prove... Actually, we can. The sheriff stepped forward. Got a real interesting telegram from Chicago, too. Seems you've got creditors of your own looking for you. Something about embezzled funds from your business partners. That's preposterous. Is it? Coulter moved closer, his presence filling the space like a gathering storm. Here's what's going to happen. Hartley, you're going to withdraw your claim on those children. You're going to get on your horse and ride out of this territory. And if you ever come near Maggie or her family again, I'll personally ensure you regret it. You're threatening me in front of witnesses. I'm promising you." The words were soft, deadly. "Man to man. You've terrorized that woman enough. It ends now." William's mask finally shattered completely. "She was supposed to be mine. I saw her first. Introduced her to Daniel. She chose wrong, and look where it got her. Working like a servant. Living in sin with a man who's not her husband." The crack of Coulter's fist against William's jaw was like a gunshot. William crashed backward over a chair, blood streaming from his nose. "That's enough," Sheriff Morrison said, though he made no move to intervene as Coulter hauled William to his feet. "You want to say that again?" Coulter asked quietly. William spat blood, his eyes wild. "You think you've won? You think a few telegrams change anything? I have legal documents. I have rights. You have nothing." A new voice cut through the tension. Judge Carter stood in the doorway, travel dusty but imposing in his black coat. "I've reviewed your documents. Mr. Hartley also reviewed some interesting paperwork from Chicago regarding your business practices, and I've spoken with the children." "The children are too young to—" "The children are old enough to know they're terrified of you." The judge's voice was granite. "They're also old enough to express their wishes. They want to stay with their mother. They want to stay here. You can't. I can, and I am. Your guardianship claim is rejected. Moreover, I'm issuing a restraining order. You're to stay away from Mrs. Hartley and her children, effective immediately." The saloon erupted in murmurs. William looked around wildly, seeking support that wasn't coming. These people had embraced Maggie as one of their own. She'd earned their respect with hard work and quiet dignity. He was just an outsider trying to tear apart something good. "This isn't over," he snarled. "Yes, it is." Coulter's voice brooked no argument. "Sheriff Morrison will escort you to collect your things. You'll be on the evening stage to Santa Fe. From there, I suggest you keep riding. Chicago, California. Hell, I don't care. But if I see you again, if I hear you've so much as sent a letter to this ranch, we'll finish this conversation permanent-like." The sheriff took William's arm. "Come on, Mr. Hartley. Time to go." As they left, the saloon patrons began to disperse. The excitement over... Tom clapped Coulter on the shoulder. "That was either the bravest or stupidest thing I've seen you do." "Both, probably." Coulter flexed his bruised knuckles. "Is she at the ranch?" "Waiting with the children, worried sick." Judge Carter approached, a slight smile on his weathered face. "That was quite a display, Coulter, though I had already made my decision based on the evidence." "I know, but he needed to understand it viscerally." "Indeed." The judge studied him. "She's a fine woman. Mrs. Hartley. Those children are lucky to have her. They'd be luckier still to have you as well." "Your Honor, I'm just saying, sometimes the law recognizes families that are made by choice rather than blood. Something to consider." He touched his hat brim. "I'll file the paperwork before I leave town. Good day, gentlemen." The ride back to the ranch felt both eternal and too short. Coulter's mind raced with everything he wanted to say to Maggie. Everything he'd held back for months out of respect for her grief and uncertainty. He found her in the kitchen garden, the children playing nearby. She looked up at his approach, her face a study in hope and fear. "It's over," he said simply. "He's gone. The judge ruled in your favor." She swayed, and he caught her, pulling her against him as the tears came. Not the silent tears of grief he'd seen before, but great gasping sobs of relief. The children ran to them, and suddenly they were all embracing. A tangle of arms and tears and laughter. "We can stay," James asked, his young voice cracking. "You can stay," Coulter confirmed. "This is your home for as long as you want it." Grace looked up at him with those two wise eyes. "Forever?" If you'll have me, Sprite. Henry tugged on his pants leg.
Does this mean you're our papa now?
The question hung in the air like a held breath. Maggie pulled back, meeting Coulter's eyes. In them, she saw everything she'd hoped for but been afraid to want.
That depends,
Coulter said carefully. On what your mama says. Mama, 3 young voices chorused. Hope naked in the single word. Maggie looked at her children, then at the man who'd fought for them, who'd stood between them and harm without hesitation or condition. The man who'd brought her back to life just as surely as she'd awakened him from his grief.
I say...
She took a breath, smiled through her tears.
I say yes, if Coulter will have us. All of us,
with all our complications and past hurts and fears. If he's brave enough to take on a ready-made family with all its chaos. Maggie Hartley, Coulter said, framing her face with his hands.
I've been waiting for you my whole life.
I just didn't know it until you walked onto my ranch with dust on your dress and fire in your eyes. Marry me, not because you need protection, not because it's proper, but because I love you, because I want to wake up every morning knowing you're there, want to raise these children as ours, want to build a life that's about more than just surviving.
Yes,
she whispered.
Oh, yes.
He kissed her then, right there in the garden with the children cheering and the ranch hands whooping from the barn where they'd been shamelessly eavesdropping. It was a kiss full of promise, of new beginnings, of love strong enough to weather any storm. When they broke apart, Henry tugged on Coulter's leg again. So are you our papa now? Coulter knelt, gathering all 3 children close. If you'll have me, I know I can't replace your father, and I won't try, but I promise to love you, protect you, and teach you everything I know about ranching, horses, and how to be good people in this world.
Can you teach me to shoot?
James asked eagerly. When you're older.
Can I have my own horse?
Grace added.
We'll see. Can I sleep in the big house forever?
Henry contributed.
Yes,
Coulter said firmly.
The big house is your house now.
As the sun set over the double V painting the desert in shades of gold and rose, the newly formed family made their way inside. There would be a wedding to plan, papers to sign, a life to build together. There would be challenges too, memories to reconcile, hearts to fully heal, a community to convince that this unconventional family was exactly as it should be. But tonight, there was laughter in the kitchen as Maggie cooked with Grace at her elbow. There was Henry's delighted shriek as Coulter swung him up on his shoulders. There was James, standing a little taller, a little prouder, as he helped Tom with the evening chores. And there was love. Love that had grown slowly in the desert soil, nurtured by courage and trust and the simple daily act of choosing each other. Love that had survived storms both literal and figurative. Love that would endure because it was built on a foundation of mutual respect and shared dreams. In his study that night, Coulter took out Martha's photograph, the one he'd kept on his desk for 2 lonely years. He studied his late wife's gentle face, remembering their love, honoring their past. I think you'd approve, he said quietly. I think you'd tell me it's time to live again, to love again. He placed the photograph carefully in a drawer, not discarded, never forgotten, but no longer a shrine to grief. The past had its place, but the future beckoned bright with promise. Tomorrow, he'd ride into town with Maggie and officially post their marriage banns. Tomorrow, they'd begin the legal process of making him the children's father-in-law, as well as in heart. Tomorrow, they'd start planning a wedding that would bring the whole community together in celebration. But tonight, he simply stood at his window, watching lamplight glow warm in the kitchen where his family gathered. His family? The words filled him with a joy he'd thought lost forever. William Hartley was gone, fled back to whatever shadows had spawned him. The Double V Ranch stood strong, ready for whatever challenges lay ahead. And in the heart of it all, a woman and a man had found their way through loss and fear to something precious and enduring. Love had won, family had triumphed, and in the vast New Mexico night under stars that had witnessed countless human dramas. Another story of redemption and second chances was written in the eternal book of the West. The morning of the wedding dawned crystal clear, with the kind of blue sky that made the desert look like paradise. The Double V Ranch had been transformed. White ribbons fluttered from every fence post. Wildflowers gathered by eager hands decorated tables set up in the yard, and the smell of baking bread and roasting meat filled the air. Maggie stood before the mirror in what had been Martha's room, now hers, wearing a dress of soft blue that Mrs. Thornton, of all people, had insisted on making for her. "It's not white," the older woman had said with uncharacteristic kindness, "but it's beautiful and it's honest. That's what matters." Grace sat on the bed, swinging her legs in her new yellow dress. "You look like a princess, Mama." "A nervous princess," Maggie admitted, smoothing non-existent wrinkles from her skirt. A knock came at the door, and Tom Briggs peered in. "Ready, ma'am. The whole territory's out there waiting." She took a deep breath. 6 months ago, she'd arrived at this ranch with nothing but desperation and determination. Now she was about to marry the man who'd given her and her children not just shelter, but home. Not just protection, but love. "I'm ready." The crowd parted as she walked toward the cottonwoods where Coulter waited. He stood tall and strong in his best suit, but it was the look in his eyes that made her heart skip. Wonder, love, and a joy that transformed his weathered features. James walked her down the makeshift aisle, trying so hard to be solemn despite his obvious excitement. Henry carried the rings on a pillow, only dropping them twice. Grace scattered wildflower petals with enthusiastic abandon. Judge Carter, who'd returned specifically for the occasion, smiled as they took their places. "Dearly beloved, we gather here today to witness something special, not just the joining of two people, but the official recognition of a family already united by choice and love." As they exchanged vows, Maggie was aware of the community around them, ranch hands who'd become family, townspeople who'd moved from suspicion to acceptance, even Mrs. Thornton dabbing at her eyes with a lace handkerchief. But mostly she was aware of Coulter, of the way his hands trembled slightly as he slipped the ring on her finger, of the crack in his voice when he promised to love and cherish her. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," Judge Carter declared, "and if I may add, by the power vested in me, I also formally recognize the adoption papers making Coulter the legal father of James, Grace, and Henry Vane." The cheer that went up could probably be heard in Santa Fe. Coulter kissed his bride while 3 children tried to squeeze into the embrace. And if there wasn't a dry eye in the crowd, well, that was just dust from the desert wind. The celebration lasted well into the evening. Tables groaned under the weight of food. Fiddle music filled the air. And even the stuffiest citizens of the town found themselves dancing under the stars. Old Sam regaled anyone who'd listen with tales of the ranch's history, while Pete Garrison made calf eyes at the schoolteacher's daughter who'd recently arrived from back east. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in magnificent purples and golds, Coulter found Maggie standing apart for a moment, watching their children, playing with the other young ones from town. "Regrets?" he asked, wrapping his arms around her from behind. She leaned back against him. "Not a one. Only that I didn't find you sooner." "We found each other when we were meant to," she said, "when we were ready." Henry broke away from the games and ran to them, throwing his arms around their legs. "Papa, Mama, come dance." And they did, all 5 of them, there in the dust of the yard while the musicians played and their neighbors clapped along. It wasn't a graceful dance. Henry kept stepping on toes. Grace twirled so enthusiastically she got dizzy, and James was at that awkward age where his limbs didn't quite cooperate. But it was perfect in its imperfection, a family dance that spoke of real life rather than fairy tales. Later, as the guests began to depart with good wishes and full bellies, Coulter carved something into the old fence post by the gate. Maggie watched over his shoulder as he worked. "The Double V Ranch," he said, stepping back. "Vane and Vane. Partners in everything." "Everything," she agreed. The final wagons rolled away as the moon rose, full and bright over the desert. Tom and the hands tactfully disappeared to the bunkhouse, taking the children for one night to camp out and tell ghost stories, giving the newlyweds privacy they'd had precious little of during their courtship. Standing on the porch of what was now truly their home, Maggie marveled at the journey that had brought her here. From the desperate widow who'd answered a help-wanted ad to a beloved wife, mother, and respected member of the community, it seemed like a lifetime rather than months. "What are you thinking?" Coulter asked, joining her. "About how that noon notice you posted changed everything. How a simple need for a cook became this." "The best $12 I ever spent on an advertisement," he said, pulling her close. "Though I got so much more than I bargained for. 3 children, a strong-willed woman, and enough excitement to last a lifetime." "A family," he corrected. "Love. A reason to wake up grateful every morning. Martha would have—" He paused, then continued more easily than he once could have. "Martha would have been happy for us. She always said this place needed children's laughter." "Now it has plenty," Maggie said, thinking of Henry's giggles, Grace's songs, James's increasingly deep voice calling across the yard. They stood together, watching the stars emerge in the vast canvas of night. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote sang to the moon. The ranch settled into peaceful quiet, the kind that comes from rightness, from everything being exactly as it should be. Mrs. Vane," Coulter said formally, offering his arm. "Would you do me the honor of accompanying me inside?" "Mr. Vane," she replied, matching his tone. "I thought you'd never ask." But before they could move, one more wagon appeared on the road. As it drew closer, they could see it was laden with furniture, driven by a familiar figure. "Is that—" Miguel Coulter called out as the old cook pulled up. "What brings you here at this hour?" The elderly man climbed down, grinning. "I heard there was a wedding. Heard the Double V finally had a real family again. Thought you might need these." He gestured to the wagon. "Furniture from my daughter's store in Santa Fe. Beds for the children. A new table for the kitchen. Some pretties for the missus. Wedding gift from the whole Delgado clan." Maggie's eyes filled with tears. "Miguel, this is too much." "No such thing as too much for family," he said firmly. "Besides, those little ones need proper beds, not those old cots. And you, Senora, you brought life back to this place. It's only right we help make it a proper home." As Tom and some of the hands emerged to help unload, Maggie was overwhelmed by the generosity, the acceptance, the community that had embraced them. Each piece of furniture was exclaimed over. Plans were made for where everything would go, and by the time Miguel departed with promises to visit soon, the house felt even more like home. "I think," Coulter said as they finally made their way inside, "this is what happiness feels like." "Yes," Maggie agreed, her heart full to bursting. This exact thing. The next morning brought controlled chaos as 3 children burst into their bedroom at dawn, too excited to remember Tom's strict instructions about giving the newlyweds privacy. "Can we really put the new beds in our rooms?" Grace asked, bouncing on the foot of their bed. "Tom's making pancakes," Henry announced, as if this were earth-shattering news. "Old Sam says he'll teach me to rope today," James added, trying to sound nonchalant about something he'd been wanting for months. Coulter groaned and pulled a pillow over his head while Maggie laughed. "Yes to the beds. Save us some pancakes. And James, listen to everything Sam says." After the children thundered out, Coulter emerged from the pillow. "Is it going to be like this every morning?" "Probably," Maggie admitted, having second thoughts. He pulled her close. "Never, though we might need to teach them about knocking." Among other things. She grew serious for a moment. Coulter, I want you to know, this isn't the life I planned. It's nothing like what I thought my future would hold. I know. I'm sorry. No, let me finish. It's nothing like I planned. And it's so much better. It's real and sometimes difficult and always surprising and absolutely perfect in its imperfection. You gave us a chance when no one else would. You fought for us. You chose us. You chose me too, he reminded her. A broken-down rancher with more scars than sense. The best man I've ever known, she corrected. The father my children needed. The husband I didn't dare hope for. From downstairs came the sound of something crashing, followed by Tom's patient voice and children's laughter. Real life beckoned with all its beautiful chaos. Ready for another day at the Double V, Mrs. Vane? With you always. As they made their way downstairs to join their family, the morning sun streamed through the windows, illuminating a home filled with love, laughter, and the promise of all the days to come. The Double V Ranch, which had once echoed with loneliness and loss, now rang with the sounds of family. Outside, the desert stretched endless and golden, full of challenges and possibilities. But inside the ranch house, around a breakfast table crowded with too many people and not enough chairs, amid spilled syrup and excited chatter about the day's plans, Coulter and Maggie Vane had found something worth more than all the gold in California. They had found home. They had found family. They had found love that bloomed in the most unlikely ground, proving once again that sometimes the best things in life come from taking a chance on a simple notice posted at noon. And in the great book of the West, where stories of courage and hope were written in dust and starlight, theirs would be remembered as a tale of two hearts that found each other across loss and learned that family is not just about blood, but about choice, commitment, and the daily act of showing up for one another. The Double V Ranch stood strong against the desert sun, a testament to the power of love and the courage of those who dare to begin again. Thank you so much for listening to this Wild West love story with me today. I'd love to know where in the world you're listening from. Drop a comment below and let's connect. Share your thoughts about Coulter and Maggie's journey. If you enjoyed this tale of second chances and frontier romance, please subscribe to Wild West Night for more authentic stories of love, courage, and adventure in the American frontier. Don't forget to hit that like button and press the hype button to help more people discover these heartwarming tales from the Old West. Until next time, partners.